The unmistakable sound of a car horn blaring at 7:15 a.m. was not how Dr. James Mitchell wanted to start his Monday. Standing at his kitchen window with coffee mug in hand, he watched as Linda Harrington, known throughout Oak Ridge Estates as HOA Karen, parked her pristine white Mercedes SUV directly across his driveway. Again. "Damn it," James muttered, setting down his mug with enough force to splash coffee onto the granite countertop. This was the third time this month, and they were only 10 days into September. Linda, with her perfectly coiffed blonde bob and perpetual scowl, emerged from her vehicle wearing the unofficial uniform of the Homeowners Association president, crisp white pants, a pastel blouse, and an air of entitlement that was practically visible. She didn't even glance toward James' house as she strode purposefully toward the Johnson residence next door, clipboard in hand. James knew exactly what was happening. The Johnsons had installed a basketball hoop for their kids last weekend, apparently a violation of the sacred HOA covenant that Linda wielded like a medieval weapon. And in her self-appointed crusade to document this transgression, she had once again blocked James' driveway with the excuse that it would only take a minute. The last time, that minute had stretched to 45, making James late for his shift at the hospital where he worked as a trauma surgeon. James grabbed his phone and snapped several photos of the Mercedes blocking his driveway before heading outside. The crisp autumn air did nothing to cool his rising frustration as he approached Linda, who was already engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with Tom Johnson. "Linda," James called out, his voice calm but firm. "You've blocked my driveway again. I have a shift starting in an hour." Linda barely glanced his way. "I'll be done shortly, Dr. Mitchell. This won't take long." "It never does, according to you," James replied, "but somehow I always end up late. Please move your car now." "The hospital won't fall apart if you're 5 minutes late," she said dismissively, turning back to Tom. "Now, as I was saying about Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Neighborhood Guidelines," James stood there, momentarily stunned by her audacity. This wasn't just rudeness. It was a pattern of behavior that had escalated since he voted against her proposed ban on vegetable gardens in front yards during the last HOA meeting. The personal vendetta was becoming increasingly obvious. "Linda, move your car or I'll have it towed," James said more firmly. "You wouldn't dare," she responded, finally turning to face him fully. "My husband plays golf with the police chief. Good luck with that." James felt his professional composure, honed through years of high-pressure emergency surgeries, beginning to crack. He took a deep breath, remembering the conversation he had just yesterday with his old college roommate Mike, a commercial helicopter pilot who had been telling James about the intricacies of aviation regulations. "Fine," James said, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. "Have it your way." He turned and walked back to his house, ignoring Linda's smug expression. Inside, he picked up his phone again, but instead of calling a tow company that might or might not respond in time, he scrolled to a different contact. "Hey, Mike. Remember the FAA regulation you were telling me about yesterday? The one about private property landings?" James asked, a plan forming in his mind as he looked out at his spacious front lawn. "I think I might need your expertise sooner than I thought." What James didn't know then was that this moment would mark the beginning of an extraordinary neighborhood battle, one that would involve aviation law, an emergency medical helicopter service, and a lesson about property rights that would echo through Oak Ridge Estates for years to come. 2 days after the driveway incident, James sat in his home office surrounded by printouts of FAA regulations, property laws, and the Oak Ridge Estates HOA bylaws. His surgical precision was evident in the meticulously highlighted sections and carefully organized stacks. On his computer screen was a satellite view of his property, with measurements carefully annotated. "This could actually work," he murmured, circling a passage in the FAA guidelines with a red pen. The conversation with Mike had been illuminating. As a commercial helicopter pilot who also worked part-time with a medical transport service, Mike had explained that helicopter landings on private property were indeed legal under certain conditions, especially for medical professionals with proper justification. "The key is that it's your property," Mike had explained over their video call the previous evening. "And as a trauma surgeon who could potentially be called in for emergencies, you have a legitimate case for occasional helicopter transport." James's phone buzzed with a text from his neighbor, Tom Johnson. Linda just issued us a $250 fine for the basketball hoop. Said she'd place a line on our house if we don't pay by Friday. This is getting out of hand. With a determined sigh, James picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Dr. Puddle, it's James Mitchell. I wanted to discuss that community outreach program we talked about last month, the one about emergency response training for residential areas. I think I found the perfect location for our first demonstration." The following Saturday morning dawned clear and calm, perfect flying weather. James stood in his driveway, sipping coffee and chatting with a small group of neighbors who had been intrigued by the flyers he distributed announcing a community emergency preparedness demonstration at his address. Among them was Tom Johnson and his wife Sarah, along with their two children who were clearly excited by the promise of seeing a real helicopter up close. Several other families from the block had gathered as well, creating a festive atmosphere with lawn chairs and coolers. Conspicuously absent was Linda Harrington, until precisely 9:15 a.m., when her white Mercedes came screeching around the corner. She pulled up to the curb in front of James' house and emerged with a thunderous expression, clutching a copy of the flyer. "What is the meaning of this, Dr. Mitchell?" she demanded, waving the paper. "You can't hold public events without HOA approval. This is a clear violation of." Her words were drowned out by the distinctive whop-pop-pop of helicopter blades as a sleek blue and white helicopter appeared over the tree line. The crowd of neighbors gasped and pointed excitedly. "What on earth?" Linda's face paled as the helicopter began to descend toward James's front lawn. "That," James said calmly, raising his voice to be heard over the growing noise, "is Life Flight 6 from County General. They're here as part of our community outreach program to demonstrate emergency medical response capabilities." The helicopter hovered momentarily before settling gracefully onto the precisely measured landing zone James had marked out with small flags. The pilot, none other than Mike, gave a thumbs up through the windshield as the rotors began to slow. Linda's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. "This is absolutely unacceptable. There are noise ordinances, safety concerns. The HOA bylaws clearly state." "Actually," James interrupted, pulling a document from his back pocket, "I've reviewed both county regulations and our HOA bylaws quite thoroughly. There's nothing prohibiting emergency service demonstrations, especially when conducted by licensed professionals on private property." He handed her the paper, which outlined the relevant regulations with his neat surgical handwriting in the margins. "You'll note that as a medical professional participating in a county-approved community education program, this demonstration falls well within legal parameters." Linda snatched the paper, her eyes narrowing as she scanned it. Behind her, the helicopter door opened and Dr. Anita Patel, the hospital's emergency department chief, stepped out wearing a flight suit emblazoned with the hospital logo. She was followed by two paramedics carrying demonstration equipment. "Dr. Mitchell," Anita called out with a wave, "perfect landing spot you selected here. We could definitely use this as one of our community response zones in the event of a major emergency." The emergency preparedness demonstration had been a resounding success. Not only had the neighbors been thoroughly engaged in learning basic first aid and emergency protocols, but the local newspaper had sent a reporter who featured the event prominently in Sunday's edition. The article praised County General Hospital's innovative community outreach and highlighted James' role in bringing the program to residential neighborhoods. James had just finished his morning coffee and was admiring the newspaper article when his doorbell rang. Standing on his porch was a stern-looking man in a suit holding a manila envelope. "Dr. James Mitchell?" the man asked. "Yes, that's me." "This is for you." He handed James the envelope. "You've been served." As the man walked away, James opened the envelope to find a formal cease and desist letter from the law firm of Bradshaw, Whitmore and Associates, representing the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. The letter demanded that he immediately halt any further helicopter landings on his property, citing numerous violations of community standards and threatening legal action if he failed to comply. James sighed, but he wasn't surprised. Linda was predictably escalating the situation. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Rachel, it's James Mitchell. Remember that offer you made to help me with legal matters after I operated on your husband last year? I think I'd like to take you up on that now." 3 days later, James found himself seated across from Rachel Goldman, one of the city's most respected property rights attorneys, in her downtown office. Rachel adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the cease and desist letter along with the documentation James had brought. "So let me get this straight," she said, a slight smile playing at her lips. "The HOA president has been repeatedly blocking your driveway, making you late for your shifts as a trauma surgeon, and when you found a creative and legal solution that actually benefits the community, she's threatening to sue you." "That's about the size of it," James confirmed. Rachel leaned back in her chair. "I have to say, James, this is one of the more interesting cases to cross my desk recently. The good news is your research is solid. The FAA regulations are clear that helicopter landings on private property are permitted when they meet certain criteria, which your demonstration clearly did." She flipped through the HOA bylaws James had provided. "And there's nothing in your HOA covenants specifically prohibiting helicopter landings. They have noise regulations, yes, but there's typically exempt emergency services. So I'm in the clear?" James asked. "Not only are you in the clear, but I think we have grounds for a counteraction," Rachel said, her eyes gleaming with the look of a lawyer who loved a good fight. This cease and desist letter borders on harassment, especially given the community benefit aspect of your demonstration. And if this Linda person has been deliberately blocking your driveway, that's a separate issue we can address. James hesitated. I don't want this to turn into a protracted legal battle. I just want her to stop blocking my driveway and respect my property rights. Sometimes, Rachel said, the best way to end a conflict is to show the other party that you're prepared to fight harder than they are. Leave this with me. A week later, Linda Harrington was chairing the monthly HOA meeting in the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center. The room was unusually crowded with nearly triple the normal attendance. James sat quietly in the back row, occasionally exchanging glances with Tom Johnson and other neighbors who had attended his helicopter demonstration. Moving on to new business, Linda announced, pointedly avoiding looking in James' direction. The board has drafted a proposed amendment to our community bylaws regarding unauthorized vehicular landings on residential property. The language prohibits... Point of order, interrupted a voice from the side of the room. All heads turned to see Rachel Goldman standing in a crisp navy suit, legal portfolio in hand. Rachel Goldman, 2 weeks after the explosive HOA meeting, Oak Ridge Estates was buzzing with activity. 6 more homeowners had applied for the emergency landing zone designation, motivated by both the tax incentives and the growing community spirit that had emerged from the controversy. A county-sponsored emergency preparedness workshop held at the community center had drawn record attendance, and James had been featured in a regional news segment about innovative community healthcare initiatives. But not everyone was celebrating this new direction for the neighborhood. Linda Harrington had been uncharacteristically quiet since the revelation about her illegitimate third term as HOA president. She had neither resigned nor called for the retroactive exemption vote that might have legitimized her position. Instead, she had retreated into a sullen silence, observed occasionally peering through her living room curtains at the increasing activity around her once quiet neighborhood. James was just finishing his breakfast when his phone rang with a call from Tom Johnson. James, you need to see this, Tom said without preamble. Check your email. James opened his laptop and found Tom's message, which contained a forwarded email from Linda to all HOA board members. The subject line read, Emergency Board Meeting, Safety Crisis in OAK or IDG Estates. The email itself was a masterpiece of alarmism, detailing alleged safety concerns, potential property value impacts, and noise pollution resulting from the helicopter program. It called for an emergency closed session of the board that evening to address this unprecedented threat to our community's well-being. She's making her countermove, James said. That's not all, Tom replied. My wife is friends with Carol from the board. Apparently, Linda has been making calls to everyone on the board, telling them that the whole helicopter situation is driving away potential buyers. She's got some real estate agent coming to the meeting to back up her claims. James considered this new development. Is there any truth to it? Are you kidding? Since your program started, there's been more interest in Oak Ridge than ever. 2 houses that had been on the market for months just sold above asking price last week. The real estate agent she's bringing is her cousin's husband. After thanking Tom for the heads up, James made a few calls of his own. If Linda wanted to play this game, he needed to be prepared. That evening, a small crowd gathered outside the community center where the closed HOA board meeting was taking place. Despite Linda's attempt to keep the proceedings private, word had spread quickly through the neighborhood. James stood with Tom and several other residents, waiting for news from inside. The doors burst open just over an hour after the meeting had begun. Board members filed out, looking variously confused, concerned, or amused. Linda emerged last, her face set in a grim mask of determination as she marched to her car without acknowledging the waiting neighbors. Carol, the board member who was friends with Tom's wife, broke away from the group and approached them. You won't believe what just happened, she said, her eyes wide. Linda presented this whole case about how the helicopter program is destroying the neighborhood. She had charts showing theoretical property value declines, complaints about noise that no one has actually made, and safety statistics that seemed completely fabricated. And the board bought it? James asked. Carol shook her head. That's the thing. She was just getting to her proposal, some emergency injunction against all aircraft. When the doors opened, in walked Janice Miller. James raised his eyebrows in surprise. Janice Miller was one of the area's top real estate developers, known for her luxury communities in the adjacent county. Janice apologized for interrupting, but said she had heard about our innovative emergency response program and couldn't wait to speak with the board. Turns out, her development company is considering a similar program for their new communities, and she wanted to learn from our experience. Carol laughed, remembering the scene. You should have seen Linda's face when Janice started talking about how properties with emergency service designations are becoming premium listings that attract medical professionals and safety-conscious families with higher incomes. So what happened with Linda's proposal? Tom asked. It died on the spot. No one would second her motion after hearing Janice talk about the 15% price premium their market research shows for homes in communities with enhanced emergency services. James smiled. His call to Rachel, who happened to have connections with several real estate developers through her property rights work, had paid off perfectly. 6 months had transformed Oak Ridge Estates. Spring had arrived, bringing with it not just blooming cherry trees along the neighborhood's winding streets, but a remarkable evolution in the community itself. The Emergency Landing Zone program had expanded to include 10 properties strategically positioned throughout the development. Each zone was marked with subtle but effective lighting that activated only when needed, designed to guide incoming helicopters while minimizing disruption to neighbors. Monthly drills had become community events with residents volunteering to act as mock patients while learning valuable emergency response skills. But perhaps the most surprising transformation was in Linda Harrington herself. After her term as HOA president had officially ended following the special election, which had been won by Tom Johnson in a landslide, Linda had disappeared from community events for several weeks. Rumors circulated about her selling her house and moving away, but then something unexpected happened. She reappeared at a county emergency preparedness meeting, sitting quietly in the back row with a notebook taking detailed notes. When asked questions, she offered thoughtful insights about implementation details that others had overlooked. Her organizational skills, once wielded as weapons to control her neighbors, were now being redirected toward ensuring the program's success. James watched this evolution with cautious optimism. He and Linda maintained a cordial but distant relationship, exchanging polite nods when their paths crossed but rarely engaging in conversation. The driveway blockages had ceased entirely. Then came the day that would be remembered in Oak Ridge Estates for years to come. James was in his backyard on a rare day off, enjoying the spring sunshine while trimming back some overgrown shrubs, when the distinctive sound of emergency sirens filled the air. Multiple police and fire vehicles sped into the neighborhood, followed shortly by the wail of an ambulance. From his position, James couldn't see where they were headed, but the commotion was clearly somewhere within Oak Ridge Estates. His phone buzzed with an emergency alert from the Neighborhood Watch app, * medical emergency on Willow Lane. First responders on scene. Emergency helicopter requested *. James felt a surge of professional instinct. Willow Lane was only 2 blocks over, within the zone where his property was the designated landing area. He quickly cleared his yard of equipment and activated the landing zone markers with the app on his phone. Within minutes, the familiar sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air announced the arrival of Life Flight 6. James stood at the edge of his property, using light wands to guide the pilot to a perfect landing on his front lawn. As the rotors slowed, the medical crew jumped out, equipment in hand. "What's the situation?" James asked the flight nurse as she gathered her gear. "Pediatric emergency," she replied grimly. 8-year-old with severe allergic reaction. EpiPens failed to resolve. "We need to get him to County General immediately." James's stomach tightened. He knew every minute could be crucial in such cases. "Do you need an extra hand?" "I'm a trauma surgeon." The nurse looked up, recognition dawning. "Dr. Mitchell?" "Yes, please." "Follow me." They jogged the 2 blocks to Willow Lane, where a cluster of emergency vehicles surrounded a house James recognized immediately. It was Linda Harrington's residence. Inside, paramedics were working on a small boy who was struggling to breathe, his face alarmingly swollen. Linda stood nearby, her face ashen, clutching the hand of a woman who had to be the child's mother. "My grandson," Linda said when she saw James, her voice breaking. "He was just eating a cookie. We didn't know he was allergic to pecans." James moved quickly to the child's side, introduced himself to the paramedics, and began assisting with the emergency care. The boy's condition was critical, but stabilizing enough for transport. Within minutes, they had him ready to move to the helicopter. As they rushed him out on a stretcher, Linda and the boy's mother followed. James noticed Linda's normally perfect hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled. All trace of the imperious HOA president was gone, replaced by a frightened grandmother. "We don't have time to drive to the hospital," James explained as they reached his front yard where the helicopter waited. "One of you can ride along." "Go," Linda told her daughter. "I'll follow by car." As the medical team loaded the boy into the helicopter, with his mother climbing in behind them, Linda turned to James, her eyes brimming with tears. "If you hadn't started this program," she began, then stopped, overwhelmed. James nodded, understanding what she couldn't say. "That's why we did it. Minutes matter in emergencies."